And later, House Democrats responded to President Bush's remarks on domestic oil production. We'll hear from Natural Resources Committee Chairman Nick Rahal and Ed Markey, Chairman of the Select Committee on Global Warming and Energy Independence. This is just under a half hour.
Facts, yeah. Ready?
We do have an audio feed if you'd like to listen to the audio feed.
Good morning. As you may know, President Bush this morning has called for opening up the outer continental shelf off the coasts of Florida and California to unlimited drilling as a way to try to lower gas prices. I think, as we have said numerous occasions before, you simply cannot drill your way to lower prices, and the facts will back us up on that. 81% of estimated oil and gas resources on federal lands, both onshore and underlying federal waters offshore in the OCS, are available for the development or will be accessible pending the completion of land use planning or environmental reviews. The amount of oil and gas reserves in these areas already open is equal to 107 billion barrels of oil and 658 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. The amount of oil which could be produced from these reserves is 10 times the amount that could be produced from opening up ANWR, as the President has once again called for. The amount of oil which could be produced from these areas represents over 14 years of current U.S. consumption. That's 7.5 billion barrels per year. The amount of gas which could be produced from these areas represents over 30 years of current U.S. gas consumption. The production of these energy resources would provide our country with additional time to develop alternatives to oil and gas and reduce our dependence on energy imports, or foreign dictators, as the President has described them. 68 million acres of federal lands, both onshore and underlying federal waters offshore in the OCS, are currently being held by oil and gas companies with no production occurring on these leases. That's 68 million acres of land onshore and onshore already available for leasing. That 60 million acres of leased but stockpiled federal oil and gas lands could produce an additional 4.8 million barrels of oil and 44.7 billion cubic feet of natural gas each day. That would nearly double U.S. oil production and increase natural gas production by 75%. It would cut U.S. imports by 1/3 and would be more than 6 times the estimated peak production from ANWR. Bottom line, you cannot drill ourselves to lower gas prices. The amount of lands that are open, the amount of permits that have been issued have all increased over recent years, yet so has the price of gas. There is no correlation between opening up more pristine areas and lowering the price of gas. No correlation whatsoever. I now yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, Chairman of our Global Climate Committee.
I thank you, Chairman Rahal, very much. And, you know, today is an historic day. The President has decided to take out some of the oldest ideas which the oil and gas industry have had for destroying the most pristine wilderness and shoreline that we have in the United States. After 8 years, President Bush and Dick Cheney have turned the GOP into the gas and oil party. That's the legacy that they are going to leave. Even though there is still 68 million acres of land that they have under lease that they could drill on, they have decided, rather than drilling there, they want to drill where we want as a nation to protect because of the sacred nature of that land, which is where our beaches and our pristine wilderness areas are. And what we're going to do, Mr. Emanuel, Mr. Rahal, Mr. Hinchey, and the Democratic Party is going to do, is we're going to give them a chance in the White House to put their money where their mouth is. We're going to give them a chance to impose fees on the oil industry on the public lands where they do not drill, where the American people have already given them an opportunity to drill. And we will increase the fees as the years go by, because otherwise they will have wound up warehousing where the oil is in the United States, that the American people, the Democratic Party, everyone wants them to drill, but they are refusing to drill. And at the same time, they're insisting that we should go to places that should be preserved forever. So we're down now to an historic debate where the White House has become a ventriloquist for the oil and gas industry, repeating the request of the oil and gas industry that they be allowed to destroy the most pristine areas of our country. But it should be no surprise after 8 years that that is their attitude. And let me just say this in conclusion. For 6 years, the Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency. They had plenty of opportunity to do this, and they did not do it. So as they now point fingers at the Democratic Party, they should just be looking in the mirror, because the finger should be pointing right back at them, because they are the ones who did not put in place an energy policy that could protect us against having consumers tipped upside down at the pump every single day. Let me turn now and recognize the gentleman from the state of New York, Maurice Hinchey.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate everyone's interest in this. This, of course, is a very important issue. And we know now, I think more and more people are beginning to understand the complete falsification of information which has been put forward consistently by the Republicans, including the President of the United States. The President now in his speech today is saying that there should be a lift of whatever ban there might be on offshore drilling. And of course, there are an awful lot of leases right now offshore. But I guess when he says that, he forgets to mention that his father put the ban in place back in 1990. So if he would be serious about this, then maybe he should take some action himself. But even if he did, that wouldn't make any contribution to the amount of oil that is available on the market today. Because, as has been said, there are 68 million acres. That's the size of 2 substantial states. 68 million acres that are already in the hands of the oil companies, which they're not using. And they have these acres all over this dry land on the United States and offshore, including in the Gulf of Mexico and up in Alaska. In almost every statement they make, they talk about the need to open up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. But what they don't mention, of course, is that they already have huge amount of acreage adjacent to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which contains more oil reserves in it than does the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and in fact several times more. Have they tapped into that? No, they haven't. Well, what's the rationale here? What's the reason? They want to control more of these leases. They don't want to produce more oil, because if they produce more oil, then the price of gasoline and home heating oil would go down. They don't want it to go down. They want to keep holding on to it and gain as many leases as possible until the price of oil goes up to $200 a barrel or $300 a barrel, so that they can increase their record profits. And they've already made, as we know, the largest profits made by any corporation in the history of America. Our Republican friends also talk about the need to set up ways in which the material can be refined, refineries. Well, do we own refineries? No. The oil companies own refineries. Should the people of the United States own refineries? Maybe so. Frankly, I think that's a good idea. Then we could control the amount of refined product much more capably that gets out on the market. Right now, the oil companies that own all of these leases, that control the production of this material, that control the price at the pump, the price of home heating oil, They're the one who control the refineries. So if there's any seriousness about what some of our Republican colleagues are saying here in the House and elsewhere about improving the number of refineries, then maybe they'd be willing to have these refineries owned publicly, owned by the people of the United States, so that the people of the United States can determine how much of the product is refined and put out on the market. To me, that sounds like a very good idea. So this is an issue that really needs to be looked at carefully. What we've been experiencing for years here, when the Republicans controlled this Congress, including in the Energy Acts of 2003 and 2005, are acts that are designed to bring more and more and more money into the oil companies. And consistent with that has been this con job that the Republicans in the House have been putting forward about the need for more leases to be available when, as we know, 68 million acres are not being used now. They're just being held on to so that they can make more money at some point in the future. I thank you very much, and now I'd like to introduce our great leader, Rahm Emanuel.
Thank you. I'm going to be quick so we can get to questions and answers. As you know, the four of us introduced legislation last week, the use it or lose it legislation to the oil companies as it relates to these 68 million acres and the leases that they hold on those acres to drill. And as Nick said, are equivalent of 14 years worth of consumption of oil by the United States, imported and produced domestically. 14 years worth that they are not drilling today, and leases have been issued. We sponsor that legislation because we do believe, unlike the White House, that you have to have both a supply and a demand approach to energy policy. When it comes to the president's approach, and the Republicans, they have a one-trick pony approach. They've been saying this since day one. It's all about drilling. We were the party that put together fuel efficiency standards for this country and finally passed, after 32 years of debate, that legislation. This morning, Ed and I sent a letter to the president to agree with the EPA so you can accelerate the fuel efficiency standards of the auto industry up to about 2018 or 2016. And that can be accomplished. Even since we passed this legislation, you can do it faster by changing the assumptions in there, and the EPA's own study says that, and we'd hope the president would adopt what the EPA has now worked up. But as the sponsors of that legislation, and I want to, as my colleagues have all alluded to here, one of the things the president didn't mention was what the vice president mentioned last week. When they started to try to scare people about China, it was drilling off of Cuba. And the Republicans in Congress started to echo that. And then they had to back off of that. They were using that scare tactic to try to intimidate people into doing things that they should not have done. When they got caught not telling the truth, they backed off of that comment. What they don't want you to know, and we're here to tell you, is a simple fact. Supply is part of this. That's why we encourage the oil companies, and we have legislation to encourage the oil companies to drill on the 68 million acres you already own, are not drilling, and is 14 years worth of supply in the United States. Use it or lose it. That simple. On the other side of the ledger, which was not part of the president's conversation, wasn't part of the vice president's conversation, dating 7 years back when he met with energy executives, is how do you have both an efficiency and a conservation strategy that moves America forward? That was not part of what the president said. He is still not, after 7 years, 6 of which were controlled with Republicans holding the House and Senate, have a strategy that finally puts in place what he said in his own State of the Union, which is that America was addicted to oil. What he's never put in place is an ability to kick that habit. We have done that in a short period of time, both with CAFE standards, second with alternative energies being brought to market, and third with the use it, lose it strategy as it relates to the oil companies starting to drill where they have leases. This should not be an attempt to get the goods through customs. And what I mean by that is scaring people into offering more leases, more drilling opportunities when they own 68 million acres, 14 years worth of supply, and are not drilling today. We will not scare the American people into doing something that they should not do at this point, given the oil industry holds leases today to 14 years worth of energy supply that would ability of us to literally wean off of foreign dependence. And so we're going to have a very sensible, common sense, but strategically thought through approach that includes both supply and demand as it relates to conservation and efficiency. We have taken those steps, and we would hope that the Republicans in the White House would work with us, and have a comprehensive approach rather than a one-trick pony as it comes to energy policy. With that, we'll take questions, all of us here.
This question is perhaps best to Mr. Emanuel and also Mr. Hinchy, since he's on appropriations. There was to be this markup today on the Interior Appropriations Bill. Mr. Peterson had this amendment. Was there concern on the committee that there might be some Democrats peel off? And I realize the reason there had been some suggestion from Republicans that this meeting would not go forward because there might not be the votes for it. I understand the rule that you can't do two committee actions at once. I understand that. But was there some concern in the committee on that score?
No, I think that they may have been concerned that there was not enough votes for the Peterson amendment. And there's clear that that's the case. There aren't enough votes for the Peterson amendment, and some sensible Republicans are likely to vote against that as well. But the main reason why the markup for that appropriation subcommittee today wasn't taken up is because of the omnibus appropriations bill, which needs to be dealt with, and we're still dealing with that. And we're hoping that we'll be able to deal with that and get that finished maybe sometime this week or at the latest early next week. So that's the main focus of the Appropriation Committee's attention right now, the omnibus appropriations bill, its contents, and how best to handle it.
What's the strategy for moving your plan? I mean, should we expect this on the floor between now and the July 4th recess? Will it be part of a larger package? What's the plan?
Well, we're going to actually be talking about that later today at a leadership meeting, but as you could see today in one of the articles, the speaker is very interested as this is part of a core part of an energy strategy. And I want to again use this opportunity since I have the podium and the microphone. Yesterday there was a story in the Wall Street Journal about the EPA showing that you could actually get fuel efficiency standards accelerated much faster by the auto industry. A study done inside the EPA. We sent a letter today to the President saying adopt what your own administration has developed. Adopt it. Encouraging him. At his press conference, he never mentioned conservation or the fuel efficiency standards. He had 4 proposals, not one of them dealt with raising the fuel efficiency standards on a faster basis that clearly can be accomplished. And it's not hard. So again, I challenge the President to have a comprehensive approach, not a one-sided approach. We'll join on this issue of, and enjoin the debate on the issue of supply. We're all sponsors on that supply side. Use it or lose it. Join us on the conservation side and the efficiency side and raise the standards quicker and faster so America can actually have a policy that represents a total approach to energy independence.
Is it fair to say then that nothing the President proposed today will get through the House this year?
What did he propose that made any sense?
Again, if this was a good plan, then they would have adopted it over the 6 years they controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency when they had a monopoly on political power in our country. One of the biggest reasons they're not going to be successful is the governors of Florida, the governors of California. Republicans are going to scream that this is not the way to go. So obviously, the Bush White House continues to ignore the obvious things which they can do. The President can announce he's going to begin to deploy the Strategic Petroleum Reserve as a weapon to pierce this speculative bubble. He refuses to do so. He can announce that the Commodities Futures Trading Commission is going to commence an investigation into the manipulation in this market that is going to be presidentially overseen. He does not do that. You don't hear those words out of the President's mouth. He can announce that he will begin to impose a fee on the oil industry if they don't drill on the public lands that they already control the leases over, because as Chairman Rahal and Mr. Hinchy and Chairman Emanuel have already said, we know that there's 4 to 5 million barrels of oil a day which is there under those lands. We only produce 8 million barrels of oil a day today. And so the industry itself has been contending that there's 4 to 5 million barrels of oil a day, and that was at $20 and $30 and $40 a barrel that they bid on those leases. It is now $135 a barrel. The industry should be making announcements that they are going to begin drilling on millions of acres of land. And the President should be asking them to do so. He is not doing it.
I want to echo something Ed just said. There are a lot of arrows in the president's quiver that he decided today not to use that would clearly affect price, whether that deals with the strategic petroleum, whether that deals with drilling right now, and those who weren't at the press conference. When we say they own these permits and leases, that means all environmental questions have been answered. All you got to do now is put metal to the ground. There's nothing holding this up from a legal standpoint. Nothing. And so everything that they could have done, or as we recommended in this letter on the efficiency, everything they could have done to deal comprehensively and deal immediately with the price at the pump, they foregone and decided to use it again as an opportunity to talk about opening up OnWire in Alaska, doing shales, etc. And none of this happens to be part of affecting the price today and also creating a comprehensive approach for tomorrow. And then third, and finally, the question isn't what we're going to do in the House. We've already taken steps. The question, I think, is also why Senator McCain is once again echoing President Bush when it comes in lip-syncing President Bush's energy policies. With that, go ahead.
Is there anything wrong with letting a state decide if it wants to opt out of the moratoria, like Virginia and the legislature and governor has proposed? What's wrong with that?
Well, we will have that vote, I'm sure, coming on the floor of the House as we've had at times in the past. But I think here, when you're talking about the public resources, we should really look at what all of the owners of the land, how that land is treated. Now, in the case of the Florida governor, I recognized just today he, like McCain, was against it before, is for it, and now he's switched his position as well. That's to follow the president. News conference today. The president didn't want to be out there in the lead, so he let McCain go first, and now they are just playing politics with this. That's all it is. And as we all recognize, they had an opportunity during their 6 years of control of both bodies of Congress and the White House. And after the passage of the Energy Act of 05, we saw an increase in wells that were drilled, but we did not see a decrease in the price of gas. So their policies have just not worked, and now they're trying to blame it all on us for not opening up these lands, the public's resources.
So how would you feel about an opt-out provision now?
Again, I think we have a responsibility in the Congress as the overseers of the public lands to make that decision, and that's where it will be made.
I've got a question about the issue of, you mentioned the issue of nationalizing refineries and having nationally owned refinery capacity. A lot of other countries have nationalized their oil industry, and you mentioned that oil and gas companies may not want to drill on these lands so that they can take advantage of ever higher gas prices. Is there any thought to having bills that would nationalize some of these refineries or start a national oil company?
Go ahead. After you.
Yeah, there's thought going on about this. Frankly, this is something that I think is essential, and I think it's only a matter of time before it takes place. I think that what we have to do has to be in the interest of the American people, primarily, basically, in the interest of the American people, not in the interest of some major corporations. And the determination as to how much of this very important material gets refined and consequently out on the market is in the hands of the oil companies. And they just do. They make those decisions based upon their efforts to drive up the price as high as they can and keep it as high as they can for as long as they can. So I think that this is something that this Congress should be thinking about, and certainly it's something that I'm thinking about, and I think that there are a few others already in the Congress who are thinking about it as well.
Let me just add one thing, and then I know you have a question, and we got to get going, is as it relates to the refinery issue, there's been a tremendous amount of incentives, tax and otherwise, given to the oil and gas companies to expand or build new ones. As I'm a little on weaker ground. I think it's been, 20 years since a new refinery has been built. Mm-hmm. And then clearly the need is there. They haven't met that. And I think whether you support or don't nationalization, the question is, what is it going to take to get the energy industry, given that we've given both direct and otherwise assistance to build more refining capacity? Go ahead.
You mentioned environmental standards, and the administration has been talking about environmentally friendly offshore drilling, and the technology for this exists. Is that true? Is it your understanding that it is more environmentally friendly, or it is possible to do so in a more environmentally friendly way?
Well, is drilling, I mean, Nick, this is
Yeah,
probably why.
I don't deny the technologies are there, and the technology's advanced a great deal in the oil and gas industry. That's true. So why are they not putting it into place on lands already open to them? They're claiming tremendous costs involved. Well, with the new technologies online in that today, I think they've addressed some of that cost issue. So it leads you once again to say, what are they waiting for? The price to go up higher? They're speculating more and more?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Here's the question. We're willing to take our questions here, but here's the question to both your colleagues at the White House and your colleagues that cover the industry. What are you going to do with the leases you have today and are not drilling? If it's a capacity issue, then no other new leases is going to solve that. What are you doing with the 68 million acres and the 14 years worth of total supply that you have not drilled? So before I can't make this any easier. It's like I talk to my kids. Before we're going to talk about dessert, what are we going to do with what's on our plate? We're not going there. Now, I hope I'm a little more successful with the energy industry than I am with my kids. Okay? But I mean, at some point, one of you in your bureaus is going to ask the oil industry, what are you doing with the 68 million acres you own and are not drilling? And were leased, not yesterday, not last week, years ago, and I want to repeat because the chairman said it, 14 years worth of supply, total, not a portion, not 20%, 14 years worth of supply that you're not drilling on today. That's why, and I get back to it, use it or lose it, and you'll be seeing a vote on that on the floor. Thank you.
Can I just, on the refinery question, if I may, on the refinery question. First, point number one, there is no evidence whatsoever that any environmental law has stopped the construction of a new refinery in the United States. Number two, the oil industry has engaged in a systematic pattern over the last 15 years of shutting down small refineries and consolidating in larger refineries. Around the world, other countries actually require oil companies to have a reserve of oil that they can deploy, which does not exist in the United States. And finally, a strategic refinery capacity domestically might make some sense if the government was going to build it and control it and then deploy that oil when it was needed. But what we've learned from the Bush administration is that with 700 million barrels of oil that they can deploy out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve right now, they refuse to do so, even though all economic evidence over the last 15 years points to the conclusion that if they did, it would have an immediate positive impact in the lowering of the price of gasoline. So this refinery issue is yet another red herring. There are so many red herrings that the Bush administration is throwing out here, we might as well construct an aquarium, okay? They don't need the refining capacity, but they need the federal...
That was number 5 on your sound bites.
What Ron does is repeat the same soundbite 10 times, and what I try to give you is 10 separate soundbites. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Being here.
How you doing, Tim? Good.